Hey everybody, Dr. Steve Riggs here from Living by Design Keto Nutrition, and I want to talk a little bit tonight about artificial sweeteners. Yeah, it's a common question we get in the keto world about artificial sweeteners, and they're big in keto. And are they good for you? Are they bad for you? Is there some sort of middle ground? What's the scoop on that? Well, let's take a look at this. It becomes a little more difficult, like everything. Everything seems to be more difficult than it first appears. So we're learning a lot about these things, and let me share some information with you. So if we look at well, first of all, what's wrong with sugar? I mean, we all know that we're supposed to avoid sugar in the ketogenic world, but why? Well, sugar spikes your insulin. We know that high insulin resistance is a major driver for obesity, diabetes, really increases inflammation, cancer, dementia. Most of our chronic diseases, 88% of us will die from some form of non-communicable disease or chronic disease, heart disease and cancer being the two biggest. And much of that is driven by insulin resistance, which in turn is driven by excessive carbohydrates in our food environment, of which sugar is certainly one of the primary ones. And so sugar is not great for you. So sugars include all sorts of things. There's 61 synonyms for sugar on processed food labels. Sucrose, fructose, glucose, all of those should be avoided, even if they're so-called natural, like honey, maple syrup, corn syrup, agave nectar, molasses, coconut sugar, etc. All of them are just sugar. So you really want to avoid those. Those are anathema if you're on the ketogenic diet. Fructose in particular should be a separate talk, but fructose should be avoided completely. It is basically not metabolized by any cell in your body except the liver. The liver has fructokinase in it, which turns it primarily into fat in your liver. It detoxifies fructose for you, basically just like it does alcohol, essentially, and drives insulin resistance. Fructose avidly forms those nasty advanced glycation end products, which screw up your proteins and enzymes and everything. It's even more addictive than glucose, if that can be believed. And remember that fructose is ubiquitous. High fructose corn syrup, is just about all processed food. Sucrose, or table sugar itself, is a disaccharide of glucose and fructose. So it's pretty hard to get away from, but you want to try to avoid fructose as much as you can. So consequently, people have seen all the deleterious effects of sugar that it has on our health. And so wouldn't it be great if we could come up with some kind of sweetener that tasted like sugar, but didn't have the health problems that sugar carries? And that's what has been driving this whole thing. So artificial sweeteners, are they effective? Are they safe? Is that something we can use? Well, most of these artificial sweeteners, if it's any consolation to you, have been labeled GRAS, generally regarded as safe by the FDA. But as they've been put out there and they're being studied, there's increasing concerns about, okay, they may be non-caloric for the most part, but are they helpful for weight loss? What about diabetes? Is there any links with cancer? Does it alter your gut microbiome? Can you get symptoms related to this? Or is it even associated with other common chronic problems like stroke and dementia? Well, let's take a look at these things. Maybe they're not regarded as safe much longer. So when we look at the sugar alcohols, there's a whole bunch of them, and I'm gonna divide them into two: the non-nutritive sweeteners and the sugar alcohols. So let's look at the non-nutritive sweeteners. These are artificial sweeteners. As the name implies, they don't carry any nutritive value, no calories or very little calories. They're many times more sweet than sugar itself. They're found in a variety of foods. They're sold separately or as additive, calorie-free sugar substitutes. In general, they don't raise your glucose levels or insulin levels, but we're gonna see there's a few exceptions to that rule. So here's some specific ones. This is saccharin. Probably heard of this one. Essentially 0 calories in saccharin. It's 300 to 400 times sweeter than table sugar. It's found in, all sorts of things: sweetened drinks, candies, cookies, medicines. You've probably seen it as Sweet and Low and other brand names. There was originally some concern with saccharin and bladder cancer, which came from rat research. And you still hear about that occasionally today, but actually that hasn't held out. There doesn't seem to be the same mechanism in humans. And so no cancer link has been confirmed in human subjects with saccharin. So that's the good news. Aspartame, chemical structure is noted up there. Discovered by a scientist accidentally in 1965 when he was working on a different agent, licked his fingers and noted something sweet. He isolated it, and it was this substance, aspartame. Composed of 2 amino acids. You'll notice one is phenylalanine, the other is aspartate. So phenylalanine, you may have heard of that. That has to be avoided in people who have an inborn error of metabolism called PKU, or phenylketonuria. So if you have PKU, you don't want to have that. And so you don't want to have aspartame. Aspartame itself is 200 times sweeter than sugar. And just like sugar, it contains the same amount of calories, actually. So this is an exception to the rule about it being caloric free. So aspartame has just as many calories as sugar does, 4 grams or 4 calories per gram. But because it's much sweeter, you use less of it. And so you can get by with less in your product. Diet Coke, sugar-free, of course, but it is not free from aspartame. So you see it in NutraSweet is a brand name, Equal, and so forth. So that's aspartame. Sucralose. Sucralose is used also in many foods and beverages. It's a no-calorie sweetener, does not affect your insulin levels, but, and here's the qualifier, it's often mixed with sugars. So Splenda, which you see the package down here, made from sugar, so it tastes like sugar, and that's true. It is made from the sucrose molecule. Some hydroxyl groups are added to it and chlorine, and so it's called sucralose, but it's often combined with bulking agents like dextrose and maltodextrin, which is basically sugar. So those do affect your insulin levels. But again, sucralose is extremely sweet, 320 to 1,000 times. It's a pretty broad range. Sweeter than sucrose, 3 times sweeter than both aspartame and asulfame, twice as sweet as saccharin. So very sweet substance, often packaged with sugar sweeteners. So go figure. So you have to watch that a little bit because that can spike your glucose and insulin itself. Asulfame, another non-nutritive sweetener. It is calorie-free. Discovered again by another chemist licking his fingers. I think you should avoid that, if you're working with chemicals. But again, German chemist this time licked his fingers in 1967 and discovered asulfame. And since 1998, asulfame has been approved for use in soft drinks, protein shakes, drink mixes of all kinds, candies, gums, all sorts of things. Coke Zero has asulfame in it as well. And then stevia. Stevia is widely used in the keto community. Stevia comes from a plant, and I think we feel better about that. Stevia rebaudiana, which is a member of the chrysanthemum family. And you can actually grow that plant yourself and just take the leaves. That's what the South Americans did with stevia for centuries. And that is perfectly fine. But what stevia usually is when you buy it in the store is a extract of that called Reb A, or rebadioside A. And Reb A is about 200 times sweeter than table sugar. It's called a novel sweetener because it's often mixed with other sweeteners like erythritol, which we'll talk about in the sugar alcohol section. And then back to sugar again, dextrose. So you can have, you're going to have something like Reb A or stevia mixed with glucose, which is what you see in stevia in the raw. So stevia in the raw is a little powder packet. You see a picture of it down there. 0-calorie sweetener in and of itself, except that it's often mixed with dextrose and or maltodextran. So you kind of have to watch that again. Your natural ingredients can be basically sugar in disguise. So in that sense, especially if you're taking a lot of stevia in the raw, it can bump your glucose and insulin levels, and you have to watch that. If you do that throughout the day, it can add up. Then there's monk fruit, Luo Han Guao. Monk fruit's interesting. Cultivated for centuries in Southeast Asia by monks in northern Thailand and southern China, and that's why it's called monk fruit. And you can see a picture of it down there. Interesting, it contains fructose and sucrose, but as the natural fruit. But the Procter & Gamble in 1995 were able to extract with solvents a substance called magrosides. And magrosides are 200 times sweeter than sugar. They are not, they don't bump your insulin levels or glucose. And so it's a relatively new sugar substitute. It does not yet have a GRAS labeling from the FDA, but the company itself has been free to market it. It's widely used. It's often mixed with stevia to reduce the cost and blunt stevia's aftertaste. And it's often mixed with erythritol to also reduce its cost and improve its suitability for baking. So monk fruit is used in that fashion quite a bit. And that brings us to sugar alcohols. So sugar alcohols are partially absorbed from the intestine into your bloodstream. So they provide a few calories, and we'll see that they vary in how much is absorbed, their sweetness, and their effects on glucose and insulin. Again, sugar alcohols are used everywhere, as we'll see. This is a table of the common sugar alcohols, comparing them to sucrose. So I just want to go over this a little bit with you to show you, because this kind of highlights the main issues, both positive and negative, about them. So you'll see that sucrose itself has 4 calories per gram, and it's, by definition, its sweetness level is 100%. Glycemic index you see there, and 100% of sucrose is usually absorbed from your gut into your bloodstream. Now, the other sugar alcohols you see, most of them have about half the calories of sucrose, and they vary significantly in their sweetness level. Most of them are not as intensely sweet as the non-nutritive sweeteners that we were looking at before, and their glycemic index is relatively low. Their absorption varies quite a bit. So for example, erythritol, 90% absorbed in the gut, and only 10% is available to farther down in your colon. Now this is an important column here, this fermentation. What is that about? Well, if the sugar alcohols are not absorbed into your bloodstream, they float down your intestinal tract to the colon, where your microbiome, the bacteria that live in your colon, get to feed on them. And as they do so, they produce carbon dioxide, a gas, and different acids and other things. And that can give the main problem with sugar alcohols that some people experience, which is GI upset, gaseous bloating, maybe some loose stools, and so on. So the more of the sugar alcohol that's available for fermentation, like isomaltose or sorbitol or lactitol, the greater the risk of those GI side effects. One sugar alcohol that I want to point out that you absolutely should avoid is maltitol. Maltitol is a common sugar alcohol seen in many products. It consistently raises glucose and insulin levels and should be avoided. And I want to point out the chemical structure. Even if you're not a chemist, you can see that maltitol is composed of glucose and sorbitol, another sugar alcohol, and glucose, which is blood sugar. So definitely that's going to raise your blood sugar levels, and it's going to spike your insulin as well. You see maltitol everywhere: sugar-free candies, chocolate, energy bars, baked goods, cream and fruit fillings, chewing gum, frostings, ice cream, other dairy desserts, all sorts of things use maltitol. So watch out. That's one you definitely should avoid. So if we put the sugar alcohols together, the ones I would say here that, that are probably the best of the sugar alcohols would be erythritol and xylitol. Those are probably the best ones. I'll get to my picks in a moment. And definitely avoid maltitol. Maltitol is the one that you just shouldn't take at all because of reasons we just talked about. So if we go through and look at some of the other things, this is something I want to point out here, and just to summarize. I mean, here's a nutrition label from a sugar-free candy bar, basically, and you can see that the total carbohydrate content is 29 grams. Okay, a lot of carbs, right? If you're supposed to stay less than 20 net carbs per day, basically on a ketogenic diet, that's a lot of carbs. But 18 of those are sugar alcohols. Okay, so they can market this as basically 11 grams of net carbs, which is still a lot actually, But some people might look at that and say, okay, maybe that's okay in a ketogenic diet. The problem with this is that when you eat a large amount of sugar alcohols like this bar, then you add other things, maybe you're using some stevia in your coffee, you've done something else with xylitol, you start adding up these things throughout the day. That can really start to affect your health and derail your weight loss, also diabetic control, and even throw you out of ketosis. So warning, warning, warning. If you're seeing a food and you're trying to eat something like this basically non-nutritive candy bar or ice cream or something else that really doesn't have a lot of nutritive value, and it's got a lot of sugar alcohols in it, you're probably not doing yourself a favor. Well, what about the health effects of these things? What do we see here? So I'm just gonna hide that and show you a couple studies that have come out now. As I've mentioned, most of these obviously are widely used today, and you might think, well, they must be safe. Not so fast. Really, they're very new, and studies are coming out showing some increased risk. This was a bombshell published in 2014 in Nature, which is one of the most premier science journals in the world, showing that consuming artificially sweetened diet drinks, diet pop and stuff, can actually increase the risk of diabetes by as much as twofold for those who drink more than 2 a day. Now, you don't get published in Nature just showing an association like that. So what they went on to do is they used a mouse model to try to elucidate how this was happening. It doesn't spike your insulin. It doesn't raise your glucose levels. So how is it increasing your risk of diabetes? And what they found out is that these non-nutritive sweeteners are actually going down and altering your gut microbiome, which in turn can affect glucose metabolism and lead to increased rates of diabetes, even without spiking your insulin or glucose levels. Their conclusion was, collectively, our results link non-caloric artificial sweetener consumption, dysbiosis, which is creating a bad microbiome in your gut, with metabolic abnormalities, thereby calling for a reassessment of massive non-caloric artificial sweetener usage. That's a big shot across the bow for artificial sweeteners published in Nature. They are not alone. This is another article. This was published in Stroke, Sugar and Artificially Sweetened Beverages and Risk of Incident Stroke and Dementia. This is a prospective cohort study. What they found was that people who drink 1 or more artificially sweetened drinks per day have an almost 3 times risk for stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and 2.5 times the risk for other forms of dementia. Not good. This is more observational data, so it's more difficult to prove causation, though it was prospective. But for those people who drink Diet Coke, this is the question. Are they doing other things that are affecting their health that would put them at increased risk for stroke and dementia? Maybe. So this study isn't definitive. Problem is, this study has been reproduced over and over again. And so we're seeing this link between artificial sweeteners, increased risk for neurologic problems, especially stroke and dementia. So it's been quite unsettling and worrisome, to say the least. This finally is a large meta-analysis. So this is a study of studies. So this is looking at hundreds of studies on artificial sweeteners and looking at their cardiometabolic health. And it was published in 2017. It pulled data from a lot of studies and showed paradoxically that artificial sweeteners can lead to worsening diabetes control and also weight gain. Again, also due to altered gut flora. So when we look at these studies, this is just an example here. So this is a graph out of this study looking at all the studies linked together. Now these are different studies. The size of the square represents how strong the study is. The line going out from that square represents the confidence interval, meaning how confident they were of whether they showed either a positive or a negative effect against diabetes. And you can see that basically all of them lined up over here with a higher risk of type 2 diabetes with non-nutritive sweeteners. Uh-oh. And then the summary, this big black diamond at the bottom shows you where all the data accumulate together. That's not good. And so at least looking at diabetes, it's certainly not helpful. So I think we can say that non-nutritive sweeteners, you would think if they're not spiking your insulin or glucose, they should be really, a freebie for diabetics, and that's just not the case. We look at some other data on that. This is looking at weight. So weight loss, weight gain with non-nutritive sweeteners is more likely the effect. BMI going up as well, obviously same correlation. So again, this is more, food for thought, I guess. So are people who eat a lot of non-nutritive sweeteners, are they doing other things? Are they overeating in other ways? Are they eating wrong kind of foods? Are they not as healthy in other ways from people who don't? Hard to say, but at least we can look at this data, and it should cause us to pause. It should at least make us think that, okay, these things are not just benign. These artificial sweeteners are not just freebies. And if we look at their conclusions, they said, quote, routine consumption of non-nutritive sweeteners may be associated with long-term increase in BMI and elevated risk of cardiometabolic disease. They say, given the widespread and increasing use of non-nutritive sweeteners, caution is warranted until the long-term risks and benefits of these products are fully characterized. So again, that's another big shot across the bow for these artificial sweeteners as to whether they're really safe or not. So bottom line here, just to summarize things, sugar's bad for you, okay? Definitely. It itself is a processed food, Sugar is created from sugar cane or sugar beets. We didn't really have that process down until the 1700s. So sugar itself is a processed food. Non-nutritive sweeteners and sugar alcohols are really new processed foods used as sugar substitutes. So basically what we're doing is we're producing a processed food to take the place of a processed food. So I don't know, what I don't want you to come away with here is the idea, well, if it's that bad, I'm just going to eat sugar then. Well, no. Okay. So that's not what I want you to hear. Sugar is definitely worse. Okay. So I would say definitely sugar is bad. The only thing I would say here is non-nutritive sweeteners aren't a freebie. So each carries their own risks and potential side effects. And even for those that don't raise glucose or insulin levels, they still may have negative cardiometabolic risks associated like dementia, stroke, diabetes, obesity, probably by altering our gut microbiome. And that's a very evolving area of scientific investigation. More to come on that, but I think we should at least be cautious. The science on these new processed foods is still very, very early, but I think we need to be careful. My advice is if you have diabetes or obesity, please don't look upon these artificial sweeteners as a freebie. They may be better than sugar, but they can still cause problems and derail your goals. They also keep your sweet tooth alive. And that's something, long term, you really want to kill that. I worry when I see people usually starting into the ketogenic diet, and the first thing they're trying to do is create fat bombs and cookies and cakes and pies as a keto variety. And in order to do that, they're using lots of sugar alcohols. And that can be really counterproductive and possibly dangerous, as we've talked about here. So at the very least, it's keeping your sugar craving alive, your sugar addiction alive. And that's something you just don't want to do. So if you're not achieving ketosis, if you're stalled out in weight loss, watch your sugar alcohol intake and get rid of them. If you're at risk for dementia, just avoid artificial sweeteners. I think there's enough information and correlation with that I would be super cautious there. Do not use them to recreate all your sugar-laden treats and breads in a keto fashion. As I mentioned, that's going to be counterproductive. And this might be the most controversial thing, and you can push back on this, and if you want to, but I'm going to say, you know what, given all this information, I would not subtract sugar alcohols from your carb count to get net carbs. So those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, net carbs in keto land, we'd like to keep those less than 20 grams per day. What's a net carb? Well, total carbs minus fiber minus sugar alcohols. So in other words, you get to keep fiber because fiber's not absorbed. You have some benefits to your gut and other things with fiber, so that's fine. Doesn't spike your insulin, etc. But we've also traditionally subtracted sugar alcohols. And I'm going to say, yeah, not so fast. They can do a lot of problems. They can be very counterproductive, as I've said. So I'm going to say don't subtract that to get your net carbs. You can subtract fiber, but don't subtract the sugar alcohols. They count. Okay, let's get real. So you're not going to probably avoid them completely. They're everywhere. If you have to have some, what do I recommend? So I'm gonna put my neck on the line here and give you some options that I think are probably the not so bad options. And number one would be stevia. Stevia doesn't contain carbohydrates or calories. It does not raise your blood sugar levels. It appears to be safe. I say non-toxic in here, although I did just read a paper showing that stevia itself can alter your gut microbiome, causing that dysbiosis. So maybe it's not so safe after all. We'll have to see, wait and see. The jury's a little bit out on that. It's very sweet, so you definitely want to just use a little bit of it, usually just drops at a time. Again, not enough long-term data on stevia to be certain of its true impact. Best choices are probably the liquid stevia, 100% pure powdered or granulated stevia. Note that stevia in the raw and some other granulated powdered forms are packaged with sugars, and that's not fair, so you don't want to do that. But stevia, okay, in a small amount is okay. A not too bad option number two is erythritol. Erythritol also doesn't raise blood sugar and insulin levels, provides nearly 0 calories. It's very low. It does get absorbed, passes through the kidney and out the body. Not much gets to your gut, so you're probably going to have a lower rate of GI side effects with this. It's available in granulated, confectionery, brown sugar type varieties. Substitutes one-on-one with sugar, I believe, so it's very useful for cooking. Cons to this, it has a very distinct cooling sensation in your mouth that some people just can't stand, especially if you get too much of it. It has fewer GI issues, but you can, if you're sensitive to this, you can still have GI side effects with erythritol for sure. And while absorbing erythritol into your blood and excreting it through your kidneys is safe, if you have kidney problems, perhaps that would be an issue. We really don't know. Number three would be monk fruit. It's also calorie free, and we're talking about the mongrosides, the type you actually can buy. Pretty good taste. I mean, it really, I think, taste profiles better than most other sweeteners, and so that's why you often see it mixed with others. Doesn't cause digestive upset. The cons to it is it's expensive, so in and of itself, it's pretty pricey. As I said, it can be mixed with fillers, so watch that. There might be undeclared ingredients in there that can throw you off, especially if they say proprietary blend. Those products might have little active mongroside ingredients, and so it's very new. And again, we don't have a lot of information on its long-term effects, so keep that in mind. And not too bad, option number four would be xylitol. Also has a low glycemic index. About half of it's absorbed in the GI tract, so lower rates of GI problems when used in small amounts. It tastes like sugar. Its level of sweetness is identical to sugar. It contains about half the calories of sugar. So like erythritol, it's also been shown to prevent cavities, so that's good. But cons to it, 50% is absorbed, but also 50% is there for your bacteria to chew up and wreak havoc with your gut. So again, if you're sensitive to that, it might be a problem. Also, definitely keep this away from your pets. Xylitol is absolutely lethal for dogs and cats. So keep it away from your animals. Bottom line is the poison's in the dose. Hippocrates said this over 2,000 years ago. And I think that's really true for artificial sweeteners. if you're really trying to keep your sugar addiction alive, this is not the place to go. You want to kill that sugar addiction. If using a small amount of artificial sweeteners can help you along your ketogenic journey, awesome. I think right now, using the ones that we've described are okay. You know, if you have a Diet Coke once a day, okay, not 6, okay? The poison clearly is in the dose. So that's a little bit about artificial sweeteners. Hope that helps you toe the line on that, and hopefully you can make some good decisions for yourself in the future. Otherwise, if you have any questions, let us know here at Living by Design Keto Nutrition. Until then, keto on, and we'll see you later.